Please welcome to the stage the Director of Research with the Center for Equity, Engagement, and Research at Detroit Future City, Edward Lynch.
So thank you for having me. While we're working on this, I was asked to kind of come in and kind of set some baseline data here and kind of describe the situation and kind of what's going on in the rental housing system or the rental housing in Detroit and kind of what the situation that we're actually trying to work through. And so, you touched on this a little bit, but like why this is actually important, not just for rental housing, but existential to the city of Detroit, is we talked about things in binaries, where we are, a city of homeowners or a city of renters, right? And really that depends on whether we're 51% renter or 51% homeowner, right? We're really 51-49, it's half and half. We're a city of both. And why this actually matters for Detroit's neighborhoods is our rental stock exists in virtually every neighborhood in the city of Detroit. It is interspersed amongst all the homeowners in a way that one relies on the other. And so when we take a look at not just the housing, but this is an important number. It's been an important number for us at Detroit Future City for a really, really long time, and started kind of a big body of work on this. When we look back in 2015 was the data, it was 75% of Detroiters making less than 50K. Now we're about 60% of Detroiters making less than $50,000. We know inflation's a thing, so it's really just you bring that down a little bit every year. But when we think about the renters in the city of Detroit, and probably a lot of places, renters are making significantly less than homeowners. Almost 70% of our renters are making less than $50,000 in here. And so what ultimately this leads to, right, is this substantial cost burden for renters within the city. So we're looking about 62% of renters are spending too much on rent. And this is concentrated at the bottom income levels, right? So people making the least have the least affordability, right? That makes total sense to probably everyone in the room, right? But where this is different in the city of Detroit, when we get into conversations about rental affordability, that's a lot of times driven by what's happening, not here in Detroit and places like it, but what's happening on the coast in places like San Francisco, New York, Washington, D.C., Seattle, where you see the affordability challenges move into the higher income bands, right? And so here in Detroit, our affordability is almost exclusively driven by the low income of residents. That's starting to change, and we're starting, if I would have shown this 3 or 4 years ago, there would be almost no people over $50,000 having affordability challenges. It's starting to move up a little bit. Because what we're seeing, right, when we look at income in the city of Detroit, when we adjust this for inflation, right, this is pretty flat, right? And you see this as well, but we don't adjust that for inflation, right? We have seen some growth. And I just wanted to show this. We're going to talk about, there's some unadjusted numbers on rent, and to kind of give kind of a better picture, kind of what's going on. But what I think is not here, right? We're talking about what's happening at the median, right? And we're seeing kind of this level kind of growth go up. If you look at the bottom decile, right? So when you could talk about this, the 36% poverty rate, that's gotten a little better, right? But we do have, the bottom decile just remains flat, right? So we have a group of people, whether it's the same people or whether it's people cycling in and out, that have this constant affordability challenge in there. And so since we're talking about a little bit about housing, right? And one of the things that we all want to talk about is how people relate to income as it relates to people across the region, right? And so done a little kind of back of the napkin math on this, right? This isn't exact, but it gives you an idea. It doesn't adjust for housing size or things like that. But really, when we look at this, we have a little over 100,000 people in the city of Detroit, less than 30% AMI. Right? It's a substantial portion of people. And when we think about and talking about rental housing, there is no market solution for this, right? This is a product that the market cannot provide, right? In any reasonable way, in any way that we think that people should be living. And when we match this, right, to what is the regulated affordable housing in the city, we have about 28,000 affordable housing units. This is an administrative data set from the city. There's probably a little error bars in here. It's a little messy, and we'd probably go clean it up a little bit. Didn't have time for this. But there's a substantial mismatch, right, in the amount of need for affordable housing and the actual availability of regulated affordable housing in the city. On top of this, we got about 66,000 or 6,600 housing choice vouchers. So it's not a full extent, but you get the idea that there's the big mismatch. Where that's located, a lot of it downtown and across the city, and kind of looking at where we have all of our affordable housing units. But let's talk what's actually out there, right? And so we look at, since the pandemic, there's been a substantial decrease in the units available at about $1,000 a month. Right? We used to have about 8,800 of these. We're down to about 5,200, so there's 36,000 fewer units at the bottom end. Right? This kind of replicates itself across the country. Harvard, the Joint Center for Housing at Harvard put out a report this week. You see that in this kind of over and over again. But what actually makes kind of this conversation is this actually challenging, right, is when we look at, talked about places around the country. This is the median contract rent for the top 50 cities by population. We have the cheapest rent in the country right now. At the median, at the top end, at the bottom end, we're second. El Paso, I think, beats us down there. So Detroit's a very different city than what's happening at the coast. This isn't San Francisco, San Jose, Washington, D.C. on the far end, right? And what this actually means, too, and we talk a lot of the conversations nationally about what's going on, we do need to add supply, and we need to continue to add housing supply in places to help affordability. But that's not going to solve our solution. It's not going to be a solution for us here in Detroit. We need to add it for a whole bunch of other reasons, but simply adding it at the bottom isn't going to get us there. And so we've talked a lot about the condition of housing, right? Our housing stock, it's old, right? 85% of rental housing was built before 1980. Home ownership housing tends to be a little bit older. And when you look at when we talk about bringing units back online and bringing things up, what's actually vacant is overrepresented in kind of the oldest housing types in the city of Detroit. And so as we think about that, we talked a little bit about costs and costs going up. And so this is the producer price index for net inputs to residential maintenance and repair. That's a long way of saying, like, this is what you'd renovate your house with, right? And the cost of that, if anybody has who's got an old house, right? Who's done some repairs in the last year or last 5 years? Did they get expensive? Has it gotten more expensive or less expensive, right? When we think about that. So really, since the pandemic, there's a big jump in the costs of what's actually going in. This doesn't account for labor either, but we have a lot of people in the city kind of doing some of their own work. So we have this kind of, things are getting more expensive. Who actually owns property in the city of Detroit, I actually think is pretty important to understanding like what's going on, right? This isn't one big group of people that owns all the property in the city of Detroit. We have 54,000 unique landlords. And so we went through and kind of, our landlord report classified this primarily based on the number of properties that they own. And when we look at this in the type 1 or type 2, these people own 1 or 2 properties. This makes up 90% of the landlords or 93% of the landlords in the city of Detroit. So ultimately what this means is we have like all these housing challenges and all of our rental property is owned by a ton of people, right? There's just 54,000 different groups or individuals out there owning rental property in the city. Kind of exacerbates that challenge. It's not just 1 or 2 people, it's everybody out there. We also have a lot of local ownership, right? So when we looked at this, particularly at the bottom end and those small owners, we have 65% of landlords in the city of Detroit have a Detroit address. So that, as we think about policy and what's out there, I think this is critically important. So this is people owning, a house down the street from them or something like that. So lots of local ownership. In the process of creating this report, we did talk to a lot of small landlords, right? And to get to some of the challenges that they have running their rental housing business. And I do want to put a point on that, right? Matt mentioned this earlier. Each one of these landlords is running a rental housing business. And people get into it for a lot of reasons, but at some point, it's got to make sense as a business for them. Or housings, I think ultimately go away as well. Some of the big challenges that the landlords we spoke to highlighted, and you see this in other work around there as well, dynamics with the city and almost kind of an adversarial relationship toward the city in kind of a way that you wouldn't see with other small businesses. And so really also expressing wanting to be more collaborative with the city and kind of look at ways to bring their housing up back into a better condition. So we also challenges with tenants, right? All the things I talked about on the front end, right? That, the low incomes of residents, that manifests itself with challenges with the tenants. It's particularly working through evictions. We do like 20,000 evictions a year, which is kind of crazy. And like that ripples its way through the market as we kind of moves rental income away from the landlord and kind of exacerbates some of these financial pressures that they're seeing. Because like we saw with the cost of rent in the city, that puts strain on landlords. Not only that, taxes, insurance, having to cover upkeep and maintenance, which is getting more expensive. A lot of that financial pressure just goes straight onto the landlord, who a lot of people see it as like a long-term investment, and you're not going to get a bunch of money right away. These are people making a couple $100s a month at most if everything is going well. But it's at the end of the day, for that long-term investment to pay off, it has to make sense as a business for them. And so we also looked at a bunch of indicators in here that you hear that people describe as landlords being kind of predatory indicators. I haven't come up with a great word to describe it still after doing this, but like people being an out-of-state owner, having a long-term vacancy with no building permit, 5 or more action-related blight violations, which is around not being compliant with the city's rental ordinance, 1 or more property condition blight violations, multiple eviction cases where you have representation being dismissed, and then around filing multiple cases for termination, and the majority of your eviction cases for termination. What we see is most landlords don't have kind of a lot of these indicators, particularly when we're talking about our small landlords, and some of them do actually have very few out there. So at least that somewhat indicates to me that there's a lot of people are trying, right? It's not kind of the negative kind of stereotypes you see around landlords in the city of Detroit. And so that I do want to kind of hit the high points that we do have in the report and some key takeaways I would like to leave everybody with today. One, we have a lot of small landlords. 93% of the landlords in the city own 1 or 2 properties, right? And that these guys are small business owners out there trying to make it work. There's lots of local ownership. I think there's an opportunity to improve interactions between the landlord and the city and build a collaborative relationship to help get properties up to code. And it's a tough market out there. Margins are small, and people are out there trying to make their landlord business work. And kind of the big takeaways, our affordability challenges are driven by the income and not by supply and cost of housing, right? And so that's, I think, key to kind of understanding what can we do to move forward from this, because we have the lowest rents in the nation already, and that's a whole different set of challenges that we're working with. Our housing stock is old. It needs repairs. We all know this. These are getting more expensive. And finally, like I said again, we have lots of small landlords trying to make it work, I think, the best that they can. Thank you.